Hey guys, it's Snow Drama here, and today I'm going to be doing a little tutorial for System.Serializable and the JSON utility that's packed in with Unity. But before we get started, I did want to put out one little disclaimer. I am not a Unity expert, and this may not be always the best practices, but this is more of a hands-on, get down and dirty with Unity kind of tutorial for people who may not know a lot about Unity or just want to get into this kind of thing in their current project. Maybe they're a hobbyist or something like that. This is kind of more of a, hey, did you know you could use the JSON utility and the System.Serializable like this? That also being said, let us get right down and dirty with the code. So we have a scene here. I have a scene already set up called game, just so I can save. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about Unity and how it does loading. Unity has a resource loader built into it, and that resource loader is goes to the resources folder. When you create a new project, it's not set up, so we will have to create a resources folder. So let's create that now. Now that we've created our resources folder, any of the files that we want to load using the built-in asset loader will go into the resources folder. So now we're going to create what we're going to call the JSON utility, or the JSON file reader class that will use the resource loader to load JSON files from the resources folder. So let's start here and create a new C# script, and this is going to be called JSON file reader. And then we will open that file up in Sublime Text, which ended up over here. Let us open that up in our text editor. I'm using Sublime Text. You can use any text editor you want. If you want to use MonoDevelop, it's very similar. It's almost exactly identical to this, so don't worry about what editor you're using. But if you'd like to know what I'm using Sublime Text because I also use it at work. Since JSON file reader is going to be a utility class, we don't actually need any of the Unity boilerplate, this start and update function. We don't need any of that. So we're actually going to start by just getting rid of that extra stuff that you don't need to know about, and we're going to add our own functions to it. So the first thing we're going to do is create a static function. So public static string, because it's going to return a string, and we're going to call this load JSON as resource, which will take a string, which is the path to that file. So inside the resources folder, we're going to put our JSON files. So that will be what this path is, any file inside the resources folder. We're going to create something called a text asset. And this is any text object, right? It could be a TXT file, it could be a JSON file. Any text object is a text asset. We're going to create something called a text asset. And this is any text object, right? It could be a TXT file, it could be a JSON file. Any text object is a text asset. So we will create a new text asset in here, and we're going to call it loaded JSON file. And this is going to be, this is where we actually load from the resources folder. So resources.load, and we're going to use these caret brackets here. These caret brackets basically just denote a type. So in this case, we're saying that we're loading a text asset because we know what it is. And then we're going to, in the parentheses, because load is a method, we're going to be using the path. Now, one of the things that happens with Unity is that the path for the resource loader is actually the name of the resource without the extension. For example, if we had a JSON file called weapon.json, we would just have it in the path as weapon, like this. But we're going to actually pass them in here as a .json, as the resource itself being a .json. So we're going to have to remove that .json. So we're going to do string JSON file path. And what this is going to do is this is just going to basically take the path and do a replace. And we're going to take .json and turn it into nothing. That's all it is. We take the path and we replace the .json with nothing. It just finds the .json, removes it from the string, and that becomes our JSON file path. And we will use that to find our text asset. This 2 lines right here is probably the most important 2 lines in this. All it's doing is we're sending it a file name. We're sending it a specific file we want to load. It's loading it in as a text asset and storing it here. Now, all we need to do is return that text asset. So we say return loaded JSON file dot text. And that's the text out of the text file, because the text asset has a lot more information to it, but we just want the text. That's all we want. We want a string of text. That's all of the content of that file. So that's what this is. All we do is return the text. So now we're going to be loading in a text file into this. In this case, we're talking about Unity, so we're talking about games. In this case, I'm going to, as an example, create a weapon, and it's going to be called a wooden sword, and we're going to load that wooden sword in as an item. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to Unity, we're going to create a new C# script, and that C# script is going to be called item. Simply put, it's an item, right? So let's open this up, and just like our JSON file reader, we're actually not going to need any of the boilerplate. The reason for this is that an item isn't actually a game object. It is a container for some information that we're storing in a text file. So we don't want any of this game object boilerplate. We actually just want it to be a public class item. Now what we'll do is we'll make that system serializable. We're making this system serializable because what this basically says is that we can do something, we can serialize the item, meaning we can take it and crush it down to its most raw form, aka the values of all of the variables, right? We can serialize it into one package and put it somewhere. In this case, we're serializing it into a human readable format, which is JSON. We're going to define in the item here, we're going to create some public variables that we're going to be able to access inside the item. So in this case, it'll be the public item string item name, public string item description, SC, so we'll say just item DESC, public int item ID. Let's see, what else should this item have? Public int gold value, and then we'll have a public float power. We're not going to call it strength, and for a specific reason that we'll get into a certain to later. So for now, that's all we need. We'll just say it's an item name, the description. So this will be our wooden sword. The description will be flimsy wooden sword. The item ID will be 0 because it's the first item in our game. The gold value will be 10 gold. And then the power of the item will be 1. That's the power of this sword. And it can be these can be any number you want. These can be any item or description you want. But for now, this is what we're going with. So this is just so now that we have a serializable item class, now we need to be able to load these items into the game. So we'll come back to here, and we're going to create a new C# script. And that C# script is going to be called item loader. And we will open the item loader up. Now, One thing is, this actually is going to be a game object because we're going to put it on a game object in our game and use the awake function to load everything into the game. So void awake. And this, if you didn't know, the boilerplate starts with start and update, and for general purpose, start and update are useful. But in this case, I want to use awake because I want to make sure that awake, because awake happens before start happens. I might actually be wrong there. Okay, so I wasn't dumb. Yes, awake is called before, so this is where we assign our values and then we can use them in start and update. We're not going to be using them today, but that would be where we would put our using of the items. Awake just makes sure this gets initialized before anything tries to access it. As long as we access it in start or update, we're okay. Awake always gets called before start and will only ever be called once during the lifetime of that game object. So, what are we going to do in awake? We're going to actually load this item. So let's just say we have a item here. So we're going to say public item. And this was an interesting thing. So the main reason I did this tutorial is because I saw some people talking about how they had just found out about System.Serializable and how cool it was. So we're going to create a item, my item, in this item loader class. Save it. We'll go back to Unity real quick. And so right off the bat, what System.Serializable can do for you. So let me load this in. So now you can see that I've added the item loader component to my game object here. What this basically allows me to do is it allows me to see, you can see that I have a name, description, ID, gold value, and power listed here right in my script, right? So a serializable component like this would actually be able to show all of its values in the editor, which is also a huge benefit to this. And that's what they were talking about in the video that I was looking at, that they were talking about System.Serializable. But I wanted to go one step further and add some new functionality to your repertoire of use cases for that. So now we can see that the item shows up, so we're going to want to load something into that item. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, on awake, we're going to get a string called load my item. So we're going to load the text from an item JSON file into this string. So this will equal our JSON file reader dot load JSON as resource, and we will give it a path of items, say weapons, wooden sword dot JSON. So that's what we want. We want to load items, weapons, wooden sword dot JSON as a resource into load my item. Or yeah, it should be my loaded item. So next up on our list here, JSON, I misspelled, JSON file reader. There we go. So now that we have our static function in JSON file reader here, called in this, it will automatically load this, and we can determine that by saying debug.log my loaded item. So, but before we do that, we're gonna have to create this. So let's go to our resources folder here, create a folder called items. Inside that, create a folder called weapons. And inside this, we will create a text document. So I'm actually going to do that over here because it's kind of a pain in the Unity editor to create like regular text assets. So we're going to create a new file here called wooden sword.json. And inside our wooden sword.json, we just have a blank file. So inside our wooden sword JSON, we could we want it to match all of the items in here. And so Unity has this JSON utility, which will actually map our variable names to values inside our JSON file. We can take item name here, and we'll say item name is wooden sword. There we go. Item name wooden sword. So it now has wooden sword as an item name. So when I read in this file, it will store wooden sword to the item name variable. So let's go through this real quick and add the rest of these. Add commas after every one. So the item description is going to be a flimsy wooden sword. The item ID is going to be 0. The gold value we said was going to be 10. And then the power is going to be 1.0 because it is a float. So we know that the power is a float, so we're going to set it to 1.0. And that maps everything we've got here. Wooden sword, flimsy, okay, so that's all the things. So in theory, everything's all set. Our item loader will go use our JSON file reader to load items, weapons, wooden sword.json as a resource, store it in my loaded item, and then log my loaded item. So let's see what happens. Now that we've got our things here, we will say boom. And there it is down here in our console. It's maybe a little hard to see, but down here right in this text field, it's going to say item name, item description, item ID, gold value, and power. So all of our actual JSON string is actually being loaded in and stored to that variable. So that's great. That's exactly what we want it to do. So now we want to store that into our myItem variable inside that. If you notice, I'll run this again, you notice it doesn't actually store the values. So first we gotta do that. So let's come back here, and underneath our debug log, we can actually get rid of the debug log now because we won't need it anymore. And now we're gonna say myItem is equal to, and now we're going to use the JSON utility. So JSON utility from JSON, and it takes a string of JSON, which is my loaded item. Now, what we do have to do before we can do this, because it will throw an error, is we have to define what type we're going to be parsing into in the right here in these carets here, and it's going to be a item type. So from JSON item, my loaded item. That string right there will take your text, your JSON text, parse it as an item into my item. And now when we go back to Unity here and run it again, we'll see that it loads all of our values into our item loader script. And there it is. Wooden sword, a flimsy wooden sword, item ID 0, gold value 10, and a power of 1. So now, obviously, now we can load a single item into as a text document, as a JSON file, into our game, into a structure, an actual class that we can then use to do things in our game. So that's where I'm going to call it for now. We'll do multiple items in the next video. We'll talk about loading in a list of items and having multiple different items and storing those items so that we can use them in the next video. So thank you for watching. If you did learn something, please leave a like, and let me know in the comments what you're going to be using this for, if you're going to use it in your game. Subscribe if you haven't already done that, and yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace out. Hey guys, it's Snowdrama here, and today I'm going to be doing a little tutorial for System.Serializable and the JSON utility that's packed in with Unity. But before we get started, I did want to put out one little disclaimer. I am not a Unity expert, and this may not be always the best practices, but this is more of a hands-on, get down and dirty with that now. Now that we've created our resources folder, any of the files that we want to load using the built-in asset loader will go into the resources folder. So now we're going to create what we're going to call the JSON utility, or the JSON file reader class that will use the resource loader to load JSON files from the resource already set up called game, just so I can save. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about Unity and how it does loading. Unity has a resource loader built into it, and that resource loader is goes to the resources folder. When you create a new project, it's not set up, so we will have to create a resources folder. So let's create the Unity kind of tutorial for people who may not know a lot about Unity or just want to get into this kind of thing in their current project. Maybe they're a hobbyist or something like that. This is kind of more of a, hey, did you know you could use the JSON utility and the System.Serializable like this? That also being said, let us get right down and dirty with the code. So we have a scene here. I have a scene resources folder. So let's start here and create a new C# script, and this is going to be called JSON file reader. And then we will open that file up in Sublime Text, which ended up over here. Let us open that up in our text editor. I'm using Sublime Text. You can use any text editor you want. If you want to use MonoDevelop, it's very similar. It's almost exactly identical to this, so don't worry about